So, The Boys. In case you aren't aware of it, The Boys is a show on Amazon Prime and the Pirate Bay that is one of those pieces of media that asks, what if people had superpowers in a more realistic world than most comic books? You know, with moral shades of grey, actual politics, people who have powers who slip through the cracks of society, the effect that the existence of a bunch of superpowered people have on regular folks like the rest of us, and so on. It's been done a lot, yes, and I wouldn't say that The Boys does it the best, but it's definitely far from the worst. Without getting into spoiler territory, what this show does really well is that it has a superhero industry being run by a giant corporate monopoly. This corporation produces big-budget movies that project the image of their heroes as heroes, and exploits literally everyone involved, even those who can run hundreds of miles an hour or shoot lasers. The Boys does not have very nice things to say about capitalism, and by centering the show around capitalist exploitation, it can pretty effortlessly humanize the people, both superpowered and not, who do terrible, terrible things without necessarily making us feel sympathy for them, because most of us know what it's like to push our bodies to the breaking point, never get enough sleep, and be regarded by faceless corporate entities only in terms of what value they can extract from us, all so that those above us can get a fucking bonus check. The Boys is really good and you should watch it. Season 2 is really good. Unfortunately, you have to bear with Season 1 in order to get there. Don't get me wrong, Season 1 is good. It just engages in a lot of edginess for edginess' sake, and approaches US politics and superhero culture as though it were still 2006, which makes sense since that was when the comics were written. I haven't read them, but as I understand it, Season 2 decided to diverge quite a bit from the comics and join us in the current world where the fascists are back, to remind us that they never actually went away. Oh, and from this point on, I'm going to be talking spoilers, so go watch The Boys if you haven't, and spoilers are a thing you care about. Now, much has been made about this show and its second season. I could talk about it in its entirety, but I'm a very busy adult with things to do. So instead, I'm going to talk about a scene that I think encapsulates what this show does really well. And no, it's not the scene where the girls kick the shit out of a Nazi, though. That scene is... What I want to talk about is the cold open from Season 2, Episode 7. And before I do that, though, I'm going to have to do two things. The first is to encourage you one more time to watch The Boys if you haven't, because this scene really should be experienced within its own context. And the second is I'm going to have to provide that context in order to talk about the scene. So, Season 1 is essentially an introduction to this corporate superhero world, and how it affects everyone and everything around it, how superheroes work and are created, all while Homelander, the show's what if Superman was a self-absorbed, power-hungry asshole character, starts showing increasingly fascistic and authoritarian tendencies, and becoming more and more paranoid, and you start to expect he's going to do what Superman did in Man of Steel, but on purpose. In Season 2, we get the introduction of Stormfront, who is comparably powerful and somewhat antagonistic to Homelander and played by the incredibly enjoyable Aya Cash, so of course you like her. At first. She has skills in manipulating social media that leads Homelander to turn to her for help, and then they start banging and working very closely together. All the while, Stormfront is revealed to have more than a little bit of the racisms. She has very right-wing views on immigration, and eventually it's revealed she's an OG Nazi whose powers caused her to live for over 100 years while still looking like 30. In fact, she was one of the first people to ever be given superpowers by her fellow Nazis as part of a program to create literal Nazi Übermenschen, a program that she is continuing to this day to create an army of super Nazis led by Homelander to cleanse the world. And the company that created Homelander was started by the same Nazis that created Stormfront. And the thing I really like about this is that for a while in Season 2, it kind of seems like they're going to play this angle where Stormfront's fascism is infiltrating the system and manipulating Homelander. But instead, we find out that the system that created her is the same system that created him, just this time with an American coat of paint. Homelander's neoconservatism and Stormfront's fascism were quite literally made for each other. And in this way, Stormfront demonstrates some important things about fascism that we far too rarely see in media portrayals of it. The first is that fascism is not a bug in the system. It's a feature. The second is that fascism never really went away. It just went dark and quiet. And the third, demonstrated quite well, I think, in the cold open of Season 2, Episode 7, is that fascism is adaptable. So, for the whole season up to this point, we've been watching all these powerful people, superheroes, corporate oligarchs, and politicians sitting in back rooms crafting their narrative or holding rallies. But in this scene, we get a glimpse of how this all looks once it plays out in the media, how all of this is seen from the perspective of a regular-ass person. The scene focuses on a previously unknown character, who's apparently named Tommy, but I'm going to call him Neil because that was the name of his actor's character in the D&D episode of Community, and I love D&D and Community. When Neil's alarm goes off at 7:30 a.m., it plays right-wing talk radio warning about superpowered terrorists invading America. As he gets dressed, he watches Stormfront fearmonger about mass immigration on a TV network owned by Vought, the same company that makes superheroes. As he goes to leave the house, his mother is watching the same news network calling for more superheroes to fight the growing threat of super terrorists, while also scrolling through social media. She's also just eating jam? There's no other food on the table. It's just the jam. It's just the jam! When he puts on his headphones, he's listening to a podcast of Stormfront doing more fear-mongering while the girl in the hall ignores him. He goes down to the corner store where the news is also playing, but this time it's a more mainstream news network, airing a congresswoman calling for an investigation into Vought, and this is the first time Neil looks worried and actively pays attention, so much so that he doesn't even look at the cashier. Later that night, he's scrolling through social media while listening to more Stormfront. He even casually scrolls past a meme that says, "Immigrate legally or die." And then the cycle repeats as he wakes up another day. Only there are some subtle differences. Neil's room has noticeably more Stormfront memorabilia, and the talk radio guys are now saying that they want more super terrorists. The Vought News Network is blaming the left and dismissing the aforementioned politician's legitimate concerns. He didn't even try to make eye contact with the girl in the hall. When he goes to the corner store, he makes the first eye contact he's made in the scene with the cashier, and some light reflects in his eye. This visibly spooks Neil. For context, glowing eyes are a very common thing that superpowered people can do in this world. Given the kind of media that Neil is saturated in, it's not hard to imagine what he thinks when he sees a brown man working at a convenience store with glowing eyes. Later that night, the social media he's scrolling through is becoming increasingly more violent, and he stays up until 3:30 absorbing the stuff. His alarm will go off in 4 hours. When the cycle repeats again, Stormfront is calling him to action over and over and over again. He doesn't respond to his mom saying have a good day, or even look in the direction of the girl in the hall. He goes back to the corner store again, and this time he pulls a gun on the guy behind the counter. Now, I'm not going to show the rest, but Neil says he saw the light in the guy's eyes. The man, whose name is Kuldeep, by the way, is confused, and Neil asks if Kuldeep is a supervillain. When Kuldeep doesn't answer, Neil yells, "Are you bulletproof, motherfucker?" and shoots him in the head. Kuldeep is not bulletproof, and Neil immediately realizes what he has done. I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I watched this scene multiple times while writing this, and it gets me every time. I'm tearing up right now while I'm recording, and I'm not the kind of person who cries easily. This scene really makes you feel like you just watched multiple lives get destroyed for absolutely no fucking reason. It also makes me feel like someone needs to hire Charlie Kuntz to do more than say a few lines because he's fucking amazing. So how does this demonstrate fascism's adaptability? Well, we know that Stormfront is a Nazi, a real honest-to-God, shook Hitler's hand, trying to forge the master race Nazi. But smart Nazis don't march around chanting, "Jews will not replace us." Instead, she hires meme farms to put out content, drives the discourse using the institutional power she has as a star Vought superhero, and drums up fear and calls to action around the popular reactionary politics of the day. What this scene, in my opinion, expertly does is demonstrate how stochastic terrorism works. Stochastic terrorism is a decentralized form of terrorism where people are radicalized to perform violent acts on an independent basis. If you want to get a better understanding of what I mean by stochastic terrorism, you should watch American Johnson's video on what they call the PewDiePipeline, if you haven't already. The fourth truth about fascism that is not often shown in media, but shown in this scene is, well, let me ask you a question. Is Neil a fascist? I mean, no, right? And not like Homelander and Stormfront are fascists. Neil is a scared kid who got sucked down fascism's marketing funnel, while Stormfront and Homelander manipulate that fear in order to secure more power for themselves. Neil clearly didn't believe he was going to kill anyone. He recoiled in horror when he realized that he had. Stormfront and Homelander, on the other hand, are at best ambivalent about the people they kill and frequently revel in it. And that's because from their position of power, human lives just don't need to matter to them. And Neil may even believe similar things to Homelander and Stormfront, even though much of Homelander's image is a lie and Stormfront is clearly hiding her power level. As the kids say, they do seem to believe a lot of their rhetoric. But even if Neil has some reactionary views, this scene clearly demonstrates this was a process of intensifying fear-mongering that he was on the receiving end of, while Stormfront played a starring role in a propaganda system that included an enormous corporate monopoly, radio pundits, and randos on the internet. The difference, if you haven't picked up on it, is power. Neil only had the power to kill one guy, while Homelander and Stormfront and the system that they represent have the power to make 1 million Neils kill 1 million guys, and that's in addition to the millions of people they could just kill themselves. And that is the fourth truth of fascism that we so rarely see in media depictions of it. It doesn't so much recruit bigots as it does draw in the powerless, those so alienated from the people around them that they rarely even make eye contact with anyone. It gives them something to fight, something to blame, a narrative that explains their alienation and naturally draws their attention away from the power structures that are actually responsible for that alienation. Neil isn't the enemy, the system is. And without that system, Neil might have just been a regular kid, just hoping that the girl in the hall would make eye contact with him. But of course, Neil is made up. I'm not saying that you should feel sympathy for the guy who ran over Heather Heyer, or that all Kyle Rittenhouse needed was a hug. I'm not saying that you should try to make nice with the Proud Boys. That seems like a risky proposition to me. I just think it's cool that The Boys used its theme of capitalist exploitation to show that stochastic terrorists weren't born that way. They went through a process of radicalization to identify with an ideology that doesn't serve them, only serves the people in power, and that's not a bug of the system, it's a feature. Because I think with the way it's portrayed, it can very naturally lead you to the conclusion that if you want to stop Neil's actions from happening, the solution isn't to stop Neil, it's to stop the system that creates Neil's. So this was a short one. Things are looking kind of grim out there. So I just wanted to make a light video, where I talk about fascism, but in a TV show as opposed to the real life stuff. So I want to thank my patrons, especially Questing Refuge. Stay safe and stay radical, but the good kind of radical, comrades. Cheers.